All right, let's jump right in. Today, we're going to unpack a pretty complex theory that's been laid out in some recent articles. It's all about aluminum's potential role in neurodevelopment. Now, we're going to walk through this step by step based strictly on the source material provided.
So where does this story begin? It starts with this incredibly vivid quote from Dr. Christopher Exley. It's from his early work on aluminum toxicity. And, this sensory memory, this almost haunting image of what aluminum poisoning looked like in young salmon, it really sets the stage for a much, much deeper investigation. So, let's go from that powerful anecdote and actually see the science in action. The source material walks us through this really fascinating experiment with rainbow trout that gives us a crystal clear visual of how aluminum can affect animal behavior. And this shows you exactly what happened. I mean, look, at the beginning, the fish are just hanging out, spread evenly through the tank. But then, water with aluminum is introduced from the left. And it happens fast. After just 2 minutes, they start moving away. By the 6-minute mark, pretty much all of them are huddled at the other end, actively trying to get away from the source. So you're probably wondering, how much aluminum did it take to cause such a strong reaction? You might be surprised. It was just 27 parts per billion. Now, to put that into perspective, the source points out that a lot of rivers in Europe and North America today actually have concentrations higher than that. So, what we see happening with those fish, well, it's basically a springboard to a much bigger question about our own world. The source material actually calls our current time the aluminum age, suggesting that our exposure to it is just everywhere. And that really brings us to the core question that's driving this entire theory. If an animal's natural instinct is to literally flee from such a tiny amount of aluminum, what does our constant, widespread exposure mean for us? This is the question that bridges the gap from that fish tank to the human-focused theory we're about to unpack. All right, so this is where we get into the nuts and bolts of it all. One of our sources, from an author named J.B. Handley, lays out what he describes as a grand theory of autism causation, and he breaks it down into 5 distinct discoveries. Now, before we get into the theory itself, we have to define a really key term here, because it's central to the whole argument: aluminum adjuvant. So what is it? It's a compound, like aluminum hydroxide, that's added to some vaccines, and its stated job is to basically kickstart a stronger immune response to the vaccine's main ingredient.
Okay, now here's a slide that really adds some context to exposure. According to a study that's cited in the source, the total amount of aluminum adjuvant that a fully vaccinated child in the U.S. gets by 18 months, well, it's shot up by almost 4 times. We're talking from 1,250 micrograms back in the mid-'80s to nearly 5,000 micrograms today.
So the theory we're looking at is built on what the source calls 5 key discoveries. Think of them like building blocks. It starts with an immune response in pregnant mothers, then it moves to the properties of the aluminum adjuvant itself, connects it to a specific immune marker, links that to postnatal vaccines, and the whole thing culminates with a direct analysis of brain tissue. Let's take them one by one.
So, discovery number 1. This is all based on the work of a Caltech scientist, Dr. Paul Patterson. His research on what's called maternal immune activation, or MIA, showed that when a pregnant mother has a major immune response, say from a really bad infection, it can actually change the brain development of the fetus.
And this quote, which is cited in the source, really captures a landmark finding from this line of research. The research, as it's presented, suggests this isn't just a fleeting event, but that there's evidence of a permanent, ongoing state of immune activation, you could call it inflammation, in the brains of people with autism.
Okay, so how does that connect to discovery number 2? Well, this is where the theory shifts its focus squarely onto aluminum adjuvant. The argument here is that a whole wave of recent science has fundamentally changed how we understand this substance, how it behaves in the body, and its potential to be neurotoxic.
The sources zero in on a few key findings from this recent research. First, it's highlighted that aluminum adjuvant is a nanoparticle, a tiny particle that the body has a really tough time getting rid of. Second, that our own immune cells can pick up these nanoparticles and carry them right into the brain, a kind of Trojan horse mechanism. And third, a French study is cited which found that repeated low doses in mice actually seem to be more neurotoxic than just one single large dose. Discoveries 3 and 4 are all about connecting the dots. They link aluminum to a very specific pro-inflammatory molecule called interleukin-6, or IL-6 for short. One study mentioned in the source found that giving aluminum increased IL-6 in the brain.
And another one, this one out of China, found that giving infant rats a hepatitis B vaccine, which has an aluminum adjuvant, also raised the IL-6 levels in their brains.
Okay, so this whole chain of evidence leads us to what the author of this theory presents as the final and maybe the most direct piece of the puzzle, a look at aluminum levels inside actual human brain tissue. And here it is, discovery number 5. This study, from Dr. Chris Exley's group, looked at donated brain tissue from 5 people who'd been diagnosed with autism. And according to the paper, they found what the source describes as extraordinarily high levels of aluminum inside that tissue. And Dr. Exley's conclusion, as quoted here, basically brings us full circle. It points right back to that Trojan horse mechanism we talked about. The study suggests the aluminum is getting a ride into the brain from immune cells that have been loaded up with it somewhere else in the body.
Okay, so we've walked through each of those 5 discoveries that make up this theory. Now let's just take a step back and look at the full picture it's painting and the bigger questions it raises, according to the sources.
So, to recap the whole chain of events laid out in the source material, the theory kicks off with a premise that immune activation can be a cause of autism. It then proposes that aluminum adjuvant is a potent immune activator, that immune cells then transport this aluminum into the brain, that the aluminum then causes brain inflammation and higher levels of IL-6, and that this entire cascade can be set off by vaccines that contain an aluminum adjuvant.
And the source material ends with one final, pretty provocative thought. The theory we've been talking about is focused on neurodevelopment, but it wraps up by asking us to think about a much broader question. Could this same exact mechanism be a factor in the rise of many other autoimmune conditions? And that's a question it leaves on the table for you to consider.